Three, two, one. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of a different podcast. And today it's just Lou and I. How are you doing, Lou?
I'm doing well. I'm just chilling here. It's a rainy day in KC, and I am excited to get going.
Absolutely. Lately, so we have had a total of 3 guests on the podcast, and some incredible stories. And Spencer Best and his heart issues that happened to him at a young age of 16 years old, being able to bounce back, turn that into a charity. And if you haven't seen that episode, it's a great one. We also had Jack Duke on, who is studying naturopathic medicine and well on his way to becoming a doctor and trying to change the world in a very fascinating way, talking about his goal of curing diabetes for himself and everybody else, and he's trying to find a way to do that through naturopathic medicine. And then we also had on Haley Ostrom, who is a professional golfer just outside of the LPGA. And she was fascinating to listen to, and her story, being able to go from a D3 college without wanting to play professionally and just kind of throwing herself into this whole golf industry and eventually turning pro, and her kind of outlook on life. And so far, man, I feel like we've had some great guests on the podcast, and truly is just the beginning, but the stories are important to share.
Yeah, their perspective. That's the whole goal of our podcast, is to have people add to what we are trying to do as individuals, because they're individuals just trying to figure things out just like we are, and that's what we're trying to do here. Have conversations that can help us grow as individuals, and anytime we get to add somebody to that, whether or not they are somebody that is an influencer or something like that, it's everybody has a perspective and everybody has an opportunity every day to be a positive impact in their community. And we picked 3 people that have all embodied that.
Absolutely. And I'm excited for our future guests as well, and what that's going to turn out like, and some people with some different backgrounds that are going to be coming on and different stories. And I'm excited to follow up with them and just kind of get into that conversation and continue to learn from everybody and have that dialogue. But obviously, there is an elephant in the room in terms of society and how this is all shaping up on the news and on social media and everything. And that is the police brutality in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think we haven't talked about it yet, and we've been seeing it develop over time. And you actually had the opportunity to go to one of the peaceful protests down in Phoenix. For the people who haven't been to one of these protests, for one matter or the other, due to COVID or XYZ reasons, just trying to stay out of harm's way, can you fill us in on what that experience was like?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was getting ready to go to the peaceful protests, I knew that there would be a lot of people there, well into the thousands. And I thought to myself that, the rioting and the looting is real. I don't know how real. I don't know how much of that is being portrayed by the news. I don't know how much I'm going to see of that. And I would estimate that there were about 5,000 people at this rally I went to, or this protest I went to. And everybody there was extremely nice. Everybody was on the same page. There weren't people there trying to cause basically friction to try and get something started. And it was a beautiful thing to just see the perspective nonetheless, whether or not you stand on the far left, the far right, or anywhere in between. To go there and see the perspective is extremely important. And I also did take into account the fact that COVID is still out and about, and that's a lot of people gathering, and that was scary to me also, but I'm fine. And I think that people should definitely be careful with that also. But to just go to a protest where there's a group that is clearly, it's such a complicated deal, but there is a huge problem. And what is being protested are the bad apples. And that's what I was out there protesting. I think that there is a lot of injustices that are going on that can be dealt with in a rational way. And there are also a lot of people out there that are fighting for things that make absolutely no sense, as far as people that don't look into the deeper meaning of something like defunding the police, where it's like, well, there are people out there that are on the far extremes of defunding the police, where they're like, well, let's just not have a police at all. It's like, well, that's not a there's no proven track record of that working throughout history, and the proven track record actually describes the opposite. So that's a conversation that needs to be had, and I think that we're on the right track in some aspects, but we are definitely not on the right track in other aspects.
I think the conversation needs to turn from the extremes and start looking at more of the middle ground. You see mass polarization in terms of political messages, and not only that, but how people view messages. And it's so just right or left. There's no gray area at all in terms of what a lot of people are putting out, what a lot of people are talking about. And to the defund the police idea, I am kind of in the bandwagon of, we definitely should not abolish the police. I think that that is a very dangerous way to go, and there's a lot of people talking about kind of where I'm at is, we can't just go on and abolish the police, because what that ends up doing is, and the experts have talked about it multiple times, in what that ends up doing is creating this power vacuum of bad people now having far more power than they did before, because what the police were actually doing was keeping the power out of their hands. And even if, the police weren't doing the best job, you didn't have people running around who are civilians, but now creating the power vacuum, far more powerful and with far more control. And there's nobody looking over those people and keeping those people in check and limiting their power and their influence among a community or society. And when I was looking into all of this, so this whole defund the police, there's a lot of people also talking about how we should maybe look into allocating the resources that we have in a different manner, so that we
more
can
effectively
basically, what's that?
More effectively allocate.
Yes, exactly. So reallocating the resources in a more effective manner to better deal with the situations of modern society. Now, this is something that it can get with as well, and we have examples of this happening. So I want to turn to an example in Austin, Texas. This happened a year or so ago. And now when people call the police dispatch, they have to ask if they need police, fire, or mental health services. So what that does is create there's not just a cop responding automatically if something is happening, and they may not be the best trained person for that specific situation. There may be better people trained and have far more experience in that specific situation that they can send. And so I think that that is a positive way of looking at it. And also in Eugene, Oregon, they have what's called the Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets. It's called CAHOOTS. And where if they get into a situation where they need that, they send over a medic and a crisis worker. And again, it's the same sort of thing as what's happening in Austin, Texas, is they have people who, if you're in a situation of mental health and or a mental crisis or something along those lines that's nonviolent, you don't have any reason to believe that there is a violent action going on, there was a violent crime that took place, and this can be taken care of without police. And that all brings me back to what is happening in Minneapolis. And what they're trying to do is, and what they effectively are doing, is dismantling the police system and the police department and creating a new system. And so that's yet to be seen exactly how that'll play out and what factors will be key and important and how they're going to go about these different things, and how they're going to try to better allocate their resources to work at a far more effective way in the modern society. And I think that's that's kind of where we've gotten to. I think everybody, like, there shouldn't be an argument as from anyone saying that police brutality is good. Like, this is something that transcends racial boundaries, and it doesn't exclude anybody. Now, I'm not saying that there is statistically far more issues with police brutality among the lines of race. That is definitely the case, and there are numbers that higher portions of populations within the Black community are having those issues, and that is something, of course, that is an important statistic. But with that being said, everybody should be upset by that. We shouldn't have this society where we should fear the police and fear having issues with police brutality. And again, I just want to make it very clear that I think a lot of people are in this kind of area of, no matter race, we shouldn't have this issues. And yes, it is being pushed by the Black Lives Matter movement, and hey, that's good with me. You know what I mean? Let's fix that injustice and then have that carry over to everybody else. I think that's a good way of going about it. But with that being said, people should be informed about how there's no track record of abolishing a police department and it actually working in a society. There isn't one successful situation that has taken place and worked in the long term. It may work in the short term, but in the long term, like, it ends up becoming this power vacuum, and we're right back to square one, but with different enemies.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just an unrealistic point of view. If somebody thinks that the police can be abolished and that life can continue on in a manner that is somewhat similar to what we're living in now, because, like, if you live in the real world, then you know that the police are absolutely necessary. And if you think that taking them away is going to make things better and not worse, then there's something seriously that person needs to learn about, because if there are no police, it will not be good for people as a whole. And to even just touch on, like, the experience of somebody that is interacting with a cop, like, every time, like you were saying, like, there's programs being put into play that it's like, well, the cops aren't needed here. Let's get somebody that is more equipped to deal with this situation. And that's something that could be implemented in training. I mean, why not? Why can't that be implemented in police training, like crisis de-escalation? Like, obviously there's some of that, but they might not be the person that you want for the job, because you don't know what that cop's last call was. It could have been for something where they pulled up to a house and they just seen something that's going to scar them for the next, however long in their life. So you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what the risk of how much risk they've been put in today, where it's like, every time they come to a call, they never know if that's going to be their last call. So as an individual, you have to respect the fact that that cop could have just been in a traumatic situation where they don't want to have a chat with you. They have a job to do, and that's their job. And once people and cops can get on a level playing field, a foundation where it's like, okay, there's a mutual respect between, like, if I get pulled over, I'm going to respect the cop to the point where my license and registration, that's ready for you. I know what you're going to ask. I know that it's my responsibility to provide that when I am speeding, or if I run a red light or something like that. You have to understand your responsibility just as much as they do. And there are a lot of bad cops out there. I've seen some disgusting videos, and some of them totally out of context, debunked as just stupid. But there are some that are undeniably, like George Floyd, or that guy in Mesa that was gunned down in the hallway of a hotel, where the cop was just blurting out unclear instructions, and this guy's on his hands and knees crying, where it's like, that cop had no respect for that guy. Absolutely zero. Didn't take control of the situation. You got to know who's going on that call. There's a lot of bad cops out there, a lot of great cops out there, mostly great cops, because I've had the unique opportunity to get to know a lot of cops throughout my jobs that I've had. And the cops that I've known, I see them as not necessarily a colleague, but we're both at work when I get to talk to cops. And so when you have that relationship with cops, you get to see them as actual human beings and not as somebody that is on a call at all times. Where there's times if I'm working and I'm chatting with a police officer, when I was working for the Royals, where there were actual Kansas City, Missouri police officers working right next to me, where I got to chat with them. If something's going down, and they'll ignore me right away because they have a job to do. And I have to respect that. I have to know this is a cop. This person spends all day, every day, the majority of their life serving and protecting the community. And to be disrespectful of that is one of the most un-American things that you can do. But that is not to say that I don't support the Black Lives Matter movement and the positive things that it is bringing. Like I said, I went to a protest this year. It's only one. It doesn't make me a political activist in either way. You know, it was a perspective that I am so glad that I was able to gain. But to ignore all of the good cops and to say to defund the police is an idea that is so not rooted in reality that it is disgusting. Terrible word choice.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point in the sense that we should approach these situations. We talk about this a lot. We talk about this in other contexts, but it carries over to exactly what we're talking about now, and that is the idea of mutual respect and empathy. And from both ends of the spectrum, the police officer and whoever is dealing with the police officer in whatever context, if we can approach that interaction with a mutual respect of the other person, just as a human being, you like whatever. I'm talking about at the most fundamental level. If you can approach that as just a fundamental respect of another human being, then I think that's the step that we need to take. And like I said, this is on both sides. Cops should be approaching these people with a respect, and each situation is a new situation. And if you're and for the cops who were just in a really bad situation on their last call, maybe there should be some sort of and I haven't heard this talked about, but maybe there should be some sort of process put in play where, hey, maybe they need a minute. You know what I mean? Maybe they need to de-escalate themselves, and maybe they need a minute and they should take a break.
Yeah.
And then allow another cop to go to that call to take care of whatever the next call is. Like maybe that could help de-escalate some of these problems, because like you said, of course, cops are put in these unique situations that most people are not put into. And I think this gets back to the idea of their training. And there's a lot of talk about training, and how little training there actually is to become a police officer in the United States. Jocko Willink was just on Joe Rogan not that long ago, I would say within the last week, and he was talking about police officers. And for those who don't know who Jocko is, he was a Navy SEAL. He was in charge of a lot of things, and in very top leadership roles with the Navy SEALs. Retired, and now he strictly pretty much speaks on leadership with companies, and does a lot of great things in terms of leadership atmospheres and information. And so anyways, he was talking about this idea of training and how he believes being a SEAL who trains, I mean, a lot. They train for months and months for one mission or, one deployment. Like it's a big deal for them. And he was saying that he thinks that cops should be training 20% of the time. So 1 out of every 5 days of work, they should be training. And instead, they're training, they're going to the academies for 9 to 12 weeks, and then they're just put right into the job. And with very little formal training thereafter. And so if we are working with cops, and this is why I think defund the police is a bad idea. And if anything, we should maybe put more resources into and reallocate resources into training, and not only training, but having more police officers on staff so that you can take the 20% of the time. You can take your day and you can go train once a week. With all that being said, like if we were able to do that and put these police officers in situations that are going to be more real world. They're going to be forced into situations where they have to make these decisions. They have to not act out of emotion. We talk a lot about that too. And actions out of emotion are oftentimes very irrational, and they don't get you anywhere because they're so quick. There's no rational thinking that goes into it. And so if you can stop thinking and stop acting out of your emotions, and you can do that through training, then that's a good situation, because now you can de-escalate a situation that normally maybe you wouldn't have been able to before, because now you've been in a situation where you have trained in that, in a similar environment. And not only that, but then the firearm handling, how all of that works. Like, if cops are paying for firearm training by themselves and they're not being reimbursed by the police department or their superiors for going to these trainings, they have to take time out of their day, take time away from their families to go get these trainings and pay for it themselves. Like, we have a systemic issue that is leading to a lack of training, a lack of knowledge, and a lack of education, in part by the police departments and the police officers themselves. Because if they're not taking those steps to become better and be better trained, then what are we actually doing? Like, we're having people, and I'm not saying that I think cops are doing, or cops are bad, but I'm just saying, as a general systemic viewpoint, we should have more training. We should have resources put in place so that they can better handle these situations.
Right. Well, and as things progress, it's important to what you said earlier. Like, I didn't hear that whole interview with Jocko, but he's obviously a, a great person to learn leadership from. And with the training aspect that we were talking about, like, there are times if instead of what the cops do now, which is, they work every single day, if they had that once a week training, they'd be just a little more mindful in their 4 days. Say they work 5 days a week, they'd be more mindful in those 4 days, and they could react instead of reacting to us. Obviously, cops have to be able to react. If shit hits the fan, like, cop has to be able to react, and there are going to be some mistakes that happen with that, and that's understandable. But there are a lot of times when a cop needs to respond and not react. They need to actually process what's happening and respond. And that could be something that they could be trained on. And that could be the once a week training where it's like, hey, we actually just, we went over this again, where it's like, hey, there are people now. Like, people are changing, and people are changing faster than ever. And cops, if their training isn't improving, then they're, like you said, they're not being, the system is not putting them in a place to succeed, where it's nowadays one thing can happen and it's like, oh, boom, career's over. Like, who's going to want to be a cop? You have to be able to make a mistake. You have to be able to take a breather. Like, if you can't make a mistake, then you're not on a level playing field with the person that it's like, hey, you know what? I didn't, like, I did make a mistake, and here's what's going to happen. You and we're going to figure out this speeding ticket more in a better way than we were. We're going to improve our path right now. I'm leveling with you right now. And that's a de-escalation matter, where it's like, let's not have a yelling match. You can have your phone out, but I'm going to right now tell you, hey, although I'm a cop right now, I'm willing to be your friend. I'm willing to show you, like, hey, I'm on your side, but you did break the law, and we're going to have a conversation about it instead of a yelling match.
Yeah, there's a consequence to these actions for people. And, like, again, that gets back to the whole mutual respect of the other person. Like, if you got caught speeding, yeah, well, you got caught speeding. Like, that's, I mean, you might be pissed. You might be pissed at yourself, or you might be pissed that he caught you, but, like, that's the way it goes. Like, there are consequences, and that. Like, we all go through driving school, we all have driver's licenses, we all understand that. And there's an assumed risk to all of this, right? And like, little mistakes can happen. It's gonna happen. We are human beings. And with that being said, we're seeing now that some of these cops who have gotten now in trouble, and deservedly so, they should be getting in trouble for their actions. But some of these cops have had numerous numerous complaints. I mean,
Yeah.
far more than two or three or, little, maybe like little mistakes. Yeah, okay, that was a mistake. Like, let's learn from that. But they're like, we can't have cops on a force that are, they have 10 complaints. Like, what are we
Yeah.
doing? We're trying to are we defining insanity where we're just going to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result? No, that person clearly is showing a pattern. And from a psychological standpoint, like, is it really going to change? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
George Floyd's
So there
killer
should
should
be
have been out earlier.
far earlier.
17
And
complaints or some shit.
yeah, I don't know the exact number, but I know it was a lot. And
In the
so
teens.
yes, exactly. And it's just so mind-boggling to me, and this gets back to the leadership aspect of what is happening. And for me, if we don't have strict boundaries and standards, and we have no discipline in what we are doing, then it's just going to create chaos, and that's exactly what it's done. We live in a world, and politically, I don't really care that much, like, who's president. It doesn't really matter to me that much. I just want the president to succeed, whoever is in office, because if they're succeeding, we as a country are succeeding, and that ups my opportunities to succeed as an individual citizen.
Yeah.
So politically, not super important. But what I'm looking at is this through a lens of leadership and the communication styles of the leadership. And for me, when you start looking at the leadership in this country and where we're at with COVID, where we're at with the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a very large issue with the leadership and the messages that are being sent out. And if you look at it from a persuasion point of view, which is a offshoot of communication, you study it, you look into it. And I'm not talking about persuasion in the sense of like negatively persuading somebody to do something bad. I'm just talking about like trying to garner a reaction from your base in a positive way. That's what I mean. That
Right.
should be the goal of any leader, is trying to make steps in a positive direction. So when sending that message, if the key elements to a persuasive message is having a plan. That, like, it's super fundamental in persuasion. But if you give somebody a step-by-step plan of how we are going to accomplish something and accomplish that goal, now that sets the standard for what that person is going to do. They have a clear
Yes.
plan and they have a path that they can follow. And when that happens, the percentage or the likelihood that they follow that plan and are now going to take into account what you said as a leader, it goes up. It's like, I don't remember the exact percentage, but there was a significant jump in the people following that plan. Now, if you look at this from a very wide lens in terms of COVID, we have masks, no masks, wear masks sometimes. Masks, they might work. Like, from the WHO, from the president, from different governors of states, they're all going about it differently. There is no leadership in terms of how we've gone about COVID. And for me, like, if as a person and understand these messages and how they can have a reaction to a broad audience, like, if we just gave people a plan, they can follow that plan and they're far more likely to follow that plan. But when there is no plan given out and there's mixed messages across all forms of not only government, in any circumstance, like when there's mixed messages, there is no plan, and that's what we're seeing right now with the whole COVID thing. And for me, it's just a broader example of a lot of other leadership issues that we're seeing. And to bring this back around to the police, leadership within the police forces are not, they're doing the exact same thing that we're seeing in politics right now, and they're not getting, or they're not, I can't say all of them. I'm just going to say in the departments that we've seen have had struggles. I'm going to use them as a specific example. Minneapolis, for example. There is no clear plan, clearly. like that's being said on a world stage, and it's very apparent that that is not what has happened, and it's been going on for years. And now what you have is chaos. There's no
Yeah.
plan. There's no boundaries. There's no disciplinary action being taken, and leadership is just turning a blind eye. And if there's no plan and there's just people are just turning a blind eye in terms of leadership and what is going on, then the result is exactly what we're seeing now. And on the COVID deal and the COVID issue, and the police issue, all of it has, for me, it all boils down to leadership and what is happening at the leadership level and the messages that they are sending and who is in charge. Like again, it's not political for me. It's just how they're going about their messages and whether or not they are using their messages to convey a certain message, or rather using it as negative and either manipulative in some way, or they have no understanding of what's going on and they're inadvertently creating chaos.
Yeah. And it's important to touch on the fact that political voting is founded in some way on running negative ads against your opponent. And like, that is just the dumbest thing that I think I've ever seen. Like, just growing up, looking at these commercials, like all of these other commercials are super positive, you know, advertising products. And then you get to a commercial where it's like, oh, this person pretty much hates some sort of thing that, like, it's just in they have it in like a red tint on the TV. Like, are you kidding me? Is this the most childish like thing I've ever seen in my life? Because that is not what a leader does. A leader does not. And what do you have? What, like, Trump has never gotten off of the horse of trying to shoot down Hillary Clinton. Like, everyone knows Hillary is an idiot. Like, she's made huge mistakes that she will blatantly lie about. She's a compulsive liar, and he had a layup to win the presidency that year. And I'm not saying that Trump's the worst guy. I'm not saying Hillary, like, what, I don't even know why. Like, the only reason that she probably got that position was because she was a woman, and it was just, she was not the right person for the job, like, clearly. And to just touch on that, like, what is it? Is it manipulation or is it persuasion? Because, like, what is the point here? Like, there are ways to go about your business that makes it seem like you are manipulating people. And to persuade, that is a positive and thoughtful way of being where you can actually lead. And so if you're in the market of persuading people, you can say, all right, here's where I'm coming from. Here's my plan forward. What do you think? But manipulation is exactly what Trump does on Twitter. He fuels the fire that is the war between what is made to be black versus white, but is really just a war of narratives, where it's like, right now there are a lot of problems that African Americans, black people are facing that are so validated that it is the evidence is overwhelming, and those issues absolutely need to be addressed. But Donald Trump, during the when Black Lives Matter was first, you know, when it was anything that you saw on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, on the news was about that, Trump's Twitter was silent. And now he's willing to talk about the police, and he's willing to go to these rallies. It's like, where were you when the country was in a huge crisis? What, does he have a leadership bone in his body? If he was the leader of my baseball team, we would be a terrible baseball team. And it's disgusting. It seriously is. And I'm not saying he's the worst president, because he's not. It's just a very difficult job. And to say that we don't have a leader in this time is extremely accurate.
Yeah. And that's okay. There, you said two things. First of all, the manipulation versus persuasion, very fine line. Very fine line. And to those people who are trying to manipulate people, check yourself, because it's not the right way to go about things. Persuasion, on the other hand, I mean, you see persuasion every day. You persuade naturally in a conversation, and you don't even realize. You don't even realize you're trying to persuade somebody. And persuasion is based on premises, and persuasion is based on fact. Manipulation is based on a twisting of reality and bending of reality in some way that is going to make your story fit some sort of other narrative, and your premise to fit some other narrative that may not be there. And you can make it appear as though it is there, but when you look at it from a critical thinking standpoint, it's not. And I think that's an important thing to look at in terms of how people are creating messages, and the vast majority of messages we're seeing is it based in fact, is it based on a premise that can be supported, or is it not, and therefore it becomes manipulation. And I think that for me is the distinction, and how I view it through a communication lens. And when looking at these messages, it's super important. Now, with that being said, the whole leadership thing, yeah, it's a problem. And the presidency of the United States, it's a hard job. I wouldn't ever want to do it. I don't think.
Nope.
I applaud anybody who has sat in that chair and has done it. But with that being said, that you have to understand leadership and understand these messages and how they're going to affect people, and how accurate they are. And if they are accurate and you're trying to make things better, and yeah, there's no reason we should have silence on the other end when we're having mass protests. The majority of them peaceful. They got a bad connotation because of the rioting and looting. Um, whether it, I don't really want to get into the rioting and looting at the moment, but a lot of them were peaceful, and I think that is, if you're going to make change, I think that's the only way you can do it. You can't meet violence with violence and expect a non-violent outcome that is going to be better. And so the whole leadership thing for me, anyways, is tough, and we should be having people stepping up, and we have seen it in small examples. Um, Governor Cuomo, I believe is his name, of New York.
Cuomo.
Yeah. Cuomo. Okay, yeah, he did a great job very early on. The governor of California, I thought, did a great job early on of taking steps and taking a leadership role when nothing was happening. There was no upper level leadership in government.
Well, that's also interesting because there are so many people who had no idea who their governor was. Like, this is one of the first opportunities with COVID and this movement where people are starting to care about who the mayor is, who the governor is. That's been pretty much lost over the last couple, 15, 20 years of like that I've been alive. It's like, I've not been given a real reason to look into who I am going to vote for mayor or governor beyond what I hear from my parents. Like there hasn't been the platform. Now we have all the information. We can look into things and fact check, but that's just been something where it's like we're now learning what the government actually is like, and this is our first opportunity as a generation to leave the country better than we found it, because like our parents' generation, they grew, I mean, my mom and dad, they were born around the year 60, and so they have, it's just the times are changing so quickly, as I always say. And for people that don't understand why I keep bringing that up, like, that is probably the most important thing going on right now. Like, if we don't monitor how things are changing, then the unexpected consequences of these changes could be dire. And there are a lot of people out there right now that do not understand socialism, do not understand communism, and do not understand the massive failures that not just the United States, but mostly other countries have undergone as far as communism and socialism, because there are catastrophic consequences, like as in deaths that sound more like a statistic than a heartfelt saying of this is how many people died, each life precious.
Yeah, and to me, that brings us to the conversation of leadership within the Black Lives Matter movement. And what we have not seen is a unified voice. Again, the leadership topic comes up again, and it's the very same scenario. We have not seen a unified voice with a clear plan of what results the movement wants, like the organization wants, not the movement. The movement and the sentiment with the movement and the police brutality and stopping that whole thing, 100%. 100% that has been made very clear, and I think that is a great message. That's the message that should be sent. But the organization as a whole, and it's being talked about on other forums as well, there is no clear unified message from the organization. And what that is doing is, again, creating chaos. And we're having a bunch of people who want to be doing something and want to be making a difference and be taking these steps to help people, and making a situation better. But without a plan, without some sort of end goal that is clear and unified from the organizational standpoint, like where does that get you? I'm not really sure. I can't answer that question. But again, it typically, when there is no solid leadership, it ends up being chaotic to some degree. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Basically, without clear leadership throughout the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement has encompassed so many things that they do not want that they represent now, because so many people, like you said, they do want to move forward and they do see the problems, but they don't know how to address them to the point where, without a plan or without an end goal where it's like, hey, well, there are some bills being put into law with like the no knock and everything, where it's like, well, that's real change happening, and that's what people are wanting. But it's an all-encompassing thing where it's like, what do we actually want as we move forward? And a term that gets just passed around now is Marxism, where it's like, what is Marxism? And I pulled up the definition from Wikipedia, and it says, the Marxist view of socialism served as a point of reference during the socialist calculation debate. Marx himself did not use the term socialism to refer to this development. Instead, Marx called it a communist society that has not yet reached its higher stage. And so there's another definition that says, Marxism is a political and economic way of organizing society where the workers own the means of production. Socialism is a way of organizing a society in which the means of production are owned and controlled by the proletariat. Marx proposed that this was the next necessary step in the progress of history. So this has played out where you have people that don't understand history trying to say, well, let's just have people run more things than they are now. Well, we live in a capitalist society, so we have to respect the people that have taken the massive amounts of risk and the people that work 80 hours a week that are giving people jobs. And that's the society that we've found that works the best as far as respecting people for who they are, instead of and giving people the actual freedom to pursue greater amounts of money in their job, where socialism does not allow for that. That gives everybody an equal platform to the point, to a fault, where people don't understand anymore that there are still people that are going to rise on the hierarchy, although you can't see it. And that ends up with basically the rounding up of, like, for example, the Jews. Like that, you cannot have a society where you just assume that everyone's going to do the right thing, because that is not what has happened over history. So to look at this problem delicately is an absolute must, because what I just said could be taken as, oh, well, he's saying that not everyone should have equal rights. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you should have to fight for your rights just like everybody else. And to fight for a good job, you should have to fight for that. Nobody gives away good jobs. Like it's a dog eat dog world in the sense of competition. Like, you got to fight for a good job every day. You got to bring it every day, just like a cop. Like, if you're a cop, you got to be the one that rises above all the negativity. I saw an African-American cop who was there was some crazy dude, a white dude that was drunk, looked homeless, calling him the N-word to his face, saying things to him that should invoke a fight. They were fighting words, But this cop held his ground and held his composure, and that is a great example of a great cop. And all these people that don't understand Marxism, they're a huge problem because they are not looking at the facts. They're not looking at a way forward, and they're the problem.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that I want to shed a little bit of light on, and that is the capitalistic society that we live in that creates competition naturally. And what competition does is then it leads to forward and upward mobility. And that is the situation that we find ourselves in this capitalistic society, is that there is opportunity for upward mobility from where you started. You can come from nothing and end with a lot, whatever that means for you, whether that is material, whether that is knowledge, whether that is just strictly based in happiness. There is an opportunity for everyone to move upwards. Now, there's a problem. There may be an opportunity on the surface level, but what we are seeing, and I think the basis of a lot of what is coming to fruition with the Black Lives Matter movement, is the unequal distribution of opportunity. And I've heard this in terms of an opportunity standpoint, and I think, and I only bring it up, and I want to give credit to them because they're exactly they were able to portray in a way that makes sense to me. And all I'm essentially doing is trying to explain it in my own words. But this unequal distribution of opportunity is what is being highlighted by a different sect of the movement. And some people are just given better opportunities and better opportunity at opportunities than others. And a lot of that has to do with poverty, extreme poverty, and, or, say you're very affluent, maybe, you're going to have more opportunities than somebody who is born into poverty, has grown up into poverty, and therefore doesn't necessarily have the same opportunity to go to school, to be educated. Even at the high school and middle school levels within the inner cities, that have high populations of poverty and extreme poverty, like those schools not being, those kids are not being educated. So what are they turning to? They're turning to things that are criminal activities, support from other people such as gangs, like that sort of thing. Those are where they have to turn because that is their opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an important distinction to make, is that yes, we live in a society where yes, everyone has an opportunity. Now, how do we get to a more level opportunity at opportunity? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that it's an important distinction to make and to note, because that is a real factor of our society, a capitalistic society. And no, I don't think equality just among like a socialism aspect is the right way to go. I just think that if we can try to find a way to maybe give people the tools that they need to succeed, and what they do with those tools is up to them. They now have been given a proper opportunity.
That is exactly right. And it is exactly right because the scariest thing that I have learned as a white person, where, like I've seen so many African American Black people posting like that white people need to learn something during this time. And I would say that I'm not necessarily the exact person that has the most to learn, but I absolutely do have things to learn. And one thought that's come to me that I haven't necessarily articulated to someone else before, is the fact, it's like, what are these Black kids being told? Like what is it actually like to be Black when they think that they can't go to college? Like, I took out loans to pay for my college. Anyone can do that. Like, is it seriously the case that they are told that they can't do that? Do they actually not understand that they can do that? Like, it's so mind-boggling to me how when these individuals are growing up in poverty, that they aren't even presented the idea that they are capable of going to college. It's not even a thought for so many people. That is what's truly scary. And that is truly the one of the worst disadvantages that you could be put at.
And that's exactly why I said what I said with the give these people the tools. And
Yes.
it's even if like you can take race out of it. Like we can talk without race, and we can just say give people who do not have the opportunity and the money and the understanding and the knowledge that this can happen. Why are we not giving them the knowledge and the tools to at least make an educated decision? These
Right.
people, they're growing up in an environment where they are literally told, like, they grow up around crime. They understand that crime is not only some of these people, and they're innocent bystanders. They just happen to be growing up in this environment, but what they're being told is no, like, this is not, like, that's not an option. We don't do that. We don't have that opportunity.
Yeah,
And
that's the
if
message,
the
whether or not it's said.
education exactly, if the education system was better and we could be like, hey, you have this opportunity, here's who you can call, here's who you can contact, here's a way to apply for a scholarship,
Right.
like here's some resources for you. That is the conversation that we should be having, because then we are creating opportunity and giving people knowledge and tools that they need to start making an upward mobility in society. Then you can get out of the hamster wheel that we find so many people in, especially in poverty, where they're just trapped because they don't feel
Yep.
like they have a way out. They feel this way because they don't have the necessary information and knowledge given to them by people who actually want to see them succeed.
And yeah, it's a thing where you really have to look at the intentions of people, because if somebody if somebody is looking at a child that's very moldable and they absorb information very quickly, their opinion of themselves gets determined very young in life. So when they're determining, like, hey, what's my ceiling? Oh, and Dave Chappelle. So in his special 846, he talks about LeBron. And what he says about LeBron is that he's just like LeBron even self refers, I'm just a kid from Akron. But LeBron's potential as an individual obviously extremely high. And Dave Chappelle says he has exceeded every expectation that anyone has ever given him since he was 16 years old. And anybody that truly hates on LeBron, you are part of the problem, because LeBron has done enough in his current amount of years to have the positive impact of 100,000 people. He's done nothing but good things. He's not perfect, but to ignore that, it's like that's where people also need to look. Like if you're not necessarily athletically gifted like LeBron, what you need to do is figure out where you can be effective. LeBron, he had to take all the haters and all the doubts and all the negativity and rise above it. And that's exactly what he did. But you have to be willing to bear a load that you can bear. You can't take on LeBron's load and just hope that things go well for you. That's an extreme amount of responsibility. Every single thing that he says for the rest of his life is going to be held under a microscope. And it's a huge responsibility. It's not one that many people would even want. But you have to look at yourself and say, maybe my ceiling truly is that I'm just going to be working at a high school and impacting lives in that way. You might not be as effective as LeBron. So what? Have some pride and have an ego that is worth having. Don't have one that blinds you from the actual positivity that you could bring to the people around you.
Yeah, and that for me is just like, and everybody is not able to follow a passion and a dream, but I think the key is trying to put yourself in situations to be passionate and understand where you can make an impact. And that understanding, I'm not saying that there's going to be a whole lot of money or passion and like that is not always the case. In fact, I would often say that it's not the case. For the vast majority of people, they have other interests and other dreams and passions that don't make a lot of money. But there an aspect of trying to understand yourself, trying to understand things. And now I understand that, getting back to the opportunity conversation, that a lot of people don't have that opportunity because they're just chasing, they're just trying to make ends meet. They're just trying to pay the bills. That is a whole other conversation for people that are in myself, in terms of and how we can make adjustments to help these people. So maybe we can start progressing forward, and that's the whole idea of what I said with the opportunity thing. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that opportunity is surrounded by money, and the more money you have, the more opportunity that you have. And I'm not saying everybody rich. That's not how capitalistic society works. But I like, at least let's get people to like above the poverty line. You know what I mean? So that, I think that the money distribution in America is maybe the conversation that we should try to begin to have, and how all of that can work out in the future. And I understand that my view of this might be completely wrong, but again, the evidence suggests that poverty and opportunity are somehow connected. And you always say that the causation issues.
Yeah,
right.
You got to look at correlation and apply it to your own way of thinking.
Exactly. The correlation does not equal causation. Now, I'm going at this topic through a lens of that. However, we should be taking a look at this, and we should be trying to understand how that is all linked and put together. And there's so many things that we could talk about with this stuff, but I think the poverty is an important one, and I think that the opportunity is an important one.
That's a correlation that is extremely important, because it is like it is a problem that disproportionately affects Black people, and that becomes a we problem. That's the whole thing. We're moving towards we. I am not Black, but I am trying to help them as a we, because I am with them. I am saying, hey, I'm here to help. I am no longer going to be whatever percentage of me was a part of the problem. I'm trying to lower that every single day, one step at a time. I'm trying to lower the percentage that I was a part of the problem. And that also means standing up for things that don't necessarily sound perfect, because there are a lot of people that no matter what you do, there's still going to be a bad apple. But that is disproportionately also represented in jails. So it's just a whole thing where it's like, do people truly have the same opportunity? No. And I heard 50 Cent on an interview where he was talking about money, and he's like, money to me I see it as something that allows me to do the things that I want to do that can end up making me money, but it allows me to live. Like, it allows me to express my ideas. And if it's a good idea, a bad idea, it allows me to live that out and experience it, because I have the funding and the opportunity, because money is opportunity a lot of the time. And so his point was so powerful to me, was it's like, if you don't have any money, like, what are you going to do? Who's going to listen to you? Who's going to get on board with your idea? Like, you can't fund this idea that you're talking about. What do you want me to fund it? So just what he was saying was like, you got to be willing to go out and figure out a way to allow your ideas to come to fruition. And if the only way that you know how to do that, and the only way that you've seen, is from people, selling drugs or doing other things that don't promote a positive life path for the community and yourself, like, what else are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to go to school where they, I was bored in school. I was in as good of a school that you could ask to go to. And like a lot of the stuff that they're trying to explain to me didn't resonate. And how could you expect that from somebody that sees the exact opposite every day in their life, and they're being explained like, this is what you should do, but this is what I live in. Like, what am I supposed to listen to? Like, how that's a very difficult predicament for someone to be put into. They don't have the education to even understand what is going on, how to
I think you're
propel
exactly
their life
right.
forward.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And this brings us back to the leadership ideals, man, and people taking a stand. And I think there are more than ever, I think we're seeing this happening. How it all plays out, I don't know. And I'm not here to speculate on that. But what I am saying is I think we're seeing some of these things happen. I think we're seeing people step up.
Yeah,
And we're seeing people who have come from nothing and trying to be an exemplar of how to do that, how to get these messages across, how to talk to these people who are in these situations, because that's what they came from. They're the people that can resonate the most. And applause for Kevin Hart as well. He has taken a very big stand and trying to teach people, and obviously he's from Philadelphia. Specifically, he goes and talks to people in Philadelphia, in the high schools, in the inner cities, about money, because nobody's talking to them about money. And so
right.
he's doing these
Yeah,
things. And so it's crazy. And that's why I think the world of information that we live in is great, and it has its downfalls. But there are positives as well. And I think we're seeing people trying to make a difference, trying to inform people, taking a stand of leadership. And I think the benefit is going to be seen short term, and especially on the long term. I think there's a lot that needs to be kind of sifted out in the short term, but in the long term, I think this makes us better, and we start approaching things as a we. I think that's the ultimate goal for everybody, and obviously, man, that's where I'm trying to get to, and that's where I want the world to get to. I think we just end up in a better place that way.
exactly. And it's all opportunity. It's like, well, everybody has the opportunity to be smarter than the day before. That brings me back to another thing that LeBron said. I'm pretty sure it was LeBron, but an interviewer asked him a bad question. And I mean, obviously, LeBron fields interviews every day that he has a basketball game, and constantly gets asked bad questions. And somebody asked him, and one time his response was just like, I didn't go to college. Like, what, you're asking me a question where it's like, what do you want me to formulate like some sort of answer for like some specific issue that doesn't have to do with basketball? What LeBron did is LeBron applied himself in the absolute best way he could for the opportunity that he was given. And so that's what that's what you should probably be thinking about when you ask LeBron a question. Like if you're in a one-on-one setting that's not post game, like LeBron was in his animalistic mode where it's like clearly he's like the best basketball player ever. Like, I mean, maybe you can argue, top however many. That's not the point. The point is when he's in that zone, you don't ask him some sort of dumb question where it's like he's just gonna say like, I didn't go to college, and he was so he showed humility, and he showed that it's like, hey, that's not my field to answer that question. But he has been the leader that people need too with this entire movement, where he's willing to go out and post and kind of say things that people are unwilling to say. And when he's like, he was somebody that now obviously players have to go to college for 1 year, like, and he got drafted out of high school. Like, what is the point of making a kid go to college for 1 year? That's so the NCAA can make money off of that kid before they go and sign their big contract. Like, it's not a coincidence that Kobe and LeBron and I think Kevin Garnett were among some of the last players to go from high school to the NBA. And the NCAA was like, oh, we can't have that. Like, what is the NCAA? What kind of leaders are those too? Like, it's a systematic problem where leadership is not being taught to people, especially high schoolers that are impressionable, and especially kids that think that their only way out is by being an athlete. And like, that's what LeBron's situation was, and that's what a lot of kids from that's a similar situation think like my only way out is to sell drugs or to become an athlete, and it's like there's actually a ton of other options and you just haven't been presented them. And it's so sad. It's seriously the issue that needs to be talked about the most. And LeBron's trying, but every time he tries to bring something up, people like to nitpick and people like to, talk, say, well, LeBron, somebody told him to shut up and dribble. Like, what? I care about LeBron's opinion, not because he's a basketball player. Well, that is part of the reason, but I care about it because he's a human being and his opinion deserves to be heard. You can't tell him to shut up and dribble just because you're a political expert on some sort of news thing. That's disgusting. That's despicable reporting.
Yeah. The whole, I mean, gets back to the empathy thing and trying there's a lot of people that are living in the gray area, man. There's a lot of agreement in the gray area, but the polarization of both sides to the extremes is where we're finding the issues and where we're not able, like people are not able to find common ground because they're living at the extremes. And as always, we talk about being open-minded. We talk about trying to gain other perspective. And I think that is the approach, in my opinion, that is the approach that people should be taking, especially in a situation like we're in, especially in a social, a whole cultural shift that we're going through right now. That's the approach, and that's the way people should be thinking about this stuff. Like, what can I gain perspective? Like, where can I gain perspective, and how can I apply that moving forward, make myself better, have a more open-minded approach, and doing these things. And again, I want to like tell and talk about the fact that if we got something wrong, or if you think we got something wrong in this podcast and this discussion, reach out to us. We are absolutely prepared to talk about these things. And if we made a mistake, absolutely, we want to be able to talk about it. We want to be able to hear opinions, but more than anything, and we say this all the time, we want to start the conversation. We want to have people that want to have conversation and that are approaching it from an open-minded perspective. And that's our whole goal, is to just start the conversation. And again, if you liked what we said, let us know. And everything, all the information that is needed to contact us will be in the description. And leave us a comment if you liked it, subscribe. And again, we're going to be having some great guests on coming in the next few weeks. And this conversation is far from over. I think that there will be multiple conversations on this. But absolutely, man, we're willing to talk about it. So I think that's where we should leave it for today.
Yeah, no doubt. And like you said, that's what we're here to do. You and I trying to grow from learning perspectives, being able to articulate our perspective, and to just be willing to start the conversation, because both of us has probably said something on this podcast that wasn't 100% accurate, and not in the sense that we were trying to mislead or anything like that, but we're still in the process of growing. We're young, we're impressionable. We're doing our best out here to just kind of say like, hey, here's where I'm coming from here. How can I move forward from this? Because it's something that affects all of us on an emotional level, where it's like, I don't want to see all these people struggling. I don't want to see that, but how do we actually move forward? And that's all we're doing, is starting the discussion. So like you said, if you got something to say, if we said something wrong and you want us to just let us know. That's the whole point here.
Yeah. The open dialogue and open conversation is what we founded this whole podcast on to begin with. And we would be doing it wrong if we didn't talk about these subjects, in my opinion. And if we're not talking about it, man, then we're just playing into the part, right? We are becoming part of the problem if we don't talk about it. And we understand that comes with, I mean, you might get something wrong. And but yeah, again, if we made a mistake, let us know. Be sure to subscribe, comment, like, and if you really liked it, give us a share. We want people to be talking with us. We want people to be having these conversations as well. And if you're one of those people that want to have a conversation, share it, get a hold of us. And as always, Lou, it's been a different podcast, man, and I appreciate your time.
Glad to be, as always. Glad to be here.
All righty. Cheers, Lou.
Peace.